So in your, okay, so for also, first off, there is in here this Respondus browser webcam setup. In-person students don't need this, but because I offer 5 points extra credit to my online students for setting it up and taking the practice quiz, I thought it would be fair to offer you guys that opportunity as well. You don't need it. You don't have to do it if you don't want to, but it's there. Maybe you need it for some other class and you want to set it up. If you haven't used Respondus before, it's an online proctoring software that shuts down, it's a browser, and what it does is it shuts down your ability to go to any other websites while you're taking the exam. It also, you have to have a webcam with it because it videos you while you're taking the exam, okay? Like I said, when you're in person, you don't need it. So it's completely up to you whether you want to access that or not. It's just, if you want to do it, it's 5 points of extra credit, okay? And by the way, I think I've mentioned this. I know I've mentioned it in my other class. The extra credit in Canvas, I have not figured out how that works. It's weird. And I'm not sure that it does work, so I may have to calculate it manually myself. So don't freak out if you're seeing, wait a minute, the points aren't what she says they're supposed to be, like the exam. I had pointed out before the exam, it's 125 points, but when you go in there, it's going to say 135 points because it doesn't recognize extra credit. But when I do the final calculations, it's going to be based on 125 points. Okay, so don't freak out about that. So anyway, that's what this is. You can go, there's a video, there's instructions, and then the test quiz if you want to take that. I also have the date wrong on this, so don't pay attention to this date yet, okay? If you're wondering about that. It will be, it's available on the day that we are going to be taking the exam, which is Tuesday. Okay, so here is your, and I'm going to go through in a little bit more specific detail. I'm not going to go through this list. You can read. This is a good guide for the things that are covered on the exam. Like I said, it's much more like the assessments than it is the homework. What I'm also going to do, it probably won't be done until later this evening, because I won't get home until late, but I'm going to make, so right now I think, can you guys access the assessments? Like I don't think, can you not? I've had some people in the other class tell me they can't access them. Has anybody tried to go back and look at their assessments? You're nodding your head. Can you access it? No. Okay. So what I'm going to do, you have to have taken the assessment. You don't get to access it if you haven't taken it. But I'm going to set it up so that you can go back and look at the assessment so you can use it to review as well. Okay? But like I said, if you haven't taken the assessment, you won't be able to access it. So that is a prerequisite that you'll have to take that assessment first. Okay? I mean, this is pretty much everything that we've covered. We've covered a lot so far, haven't we? We've gone through quite a bit. So remember, we started out in chapter 1 with all those laws. So be familiar with the acronyms. I'm not going to ask you specific questions about the laws. You don't have to quote them chapter and verse by any means, but I want you to be able to distinguish between the different laws. So, if I say ACA versus FMLA, you know that those two are, one is the Affordable Care Act, and that had to do with health care. One is the Family Medical Leave Act, and that had to do with offering unpaid leave of absences for certain employees for certain periods of time. So, and they didn't have to risk losing their job. So that sort of thing. You can distinguish between them. That if the word ERISA is thrown out there, it has to do with retirement accounts. Okay? So have a general understanding. You'll be asked more specific questions about the FLSA because we went through it a lot more, and it is much more, it pertains much more to what we are doing in this class. So that code of ethics as well, you'll want to review that. Might be something that you want to put on your sheet. Something to remind you of what those different points were. The functions of the Human Resources Department versus the Payroll Department. You know, Human Resources has a very wide range of responsibilities, essentially, you know, taking care of the life cycle of an employee from beginning to end, cradle to grave, as far as their employment goes. And then what the duties of the Payroll Department as well, and how they work together. The payroll cycle, so there's in your textbook, and I know this is the 2022, but it's in the 2023 as well. There is, in chapter 1, pretty sure it's chapter 1. Let's see the page. There is a flow chart. It's human resources. Okay, so there's, I don't know what, it's figure 1.8 in this book. This is 2022. I think it's the same thing in 2023. That has kind of a flow chart for the different procedures of the payroll accounting cycle, you know, from start to finish. Essentially starting with recording those hours, entering them into the system, and, you know, from there completing that payroll register, and then that payroll register is kind of the center of a spoke. It is used for lots of different purposes. It's used to create the paychecks. It's used to prepare lots of different payroll reports. It's used for preparing the financial statements, the accounting financial statements, maintaining deduction records. But that is what I'm talking about here is something we didn't specifically go through that figure in class, but it is there in your textbook. So I want you to take a look at that. Payroll frequencies. You know, most of these are easy. Weekly and monthly are easy. It's keeping straight that bi-weekly and semi-monthly. Make sure you know those. Bi-weekly again is every 2 weeks. Semi-monthly is twice a month. I guess you can kind of remember that. It's got the word month in it. So, new hire reporting. Requirements for new hire reporting. Remember we talked about the fact that we've got to report to the state within 20 days that an individual has been hired in order to, for the child support purposes, have to fill out W-4 forms. The employee has to fill out W-4 forms, I-9 forms, as well as several different types of state forms. So just having a general idea of what those new hire reportings are. The difference between exempt and non-exempt employees, and remember exempt refers to being exempt from the overtime and minimum wage provisions of the FLSA. Okay, so being able to keep those two straight. And remember we talked about those different characteristics of exempt employees. We talked about the administrative characteristics, or professionals, creative professionals, highly paid individuals. You know, we went through that whole list of kind of duties that would indicate that somebody could be classified as exempt. OASDI and HI, or Medicare, so Social Security and Medicare. Just being generally aware of that Social Security Act and what it entails. And we went through a couple videos, which are still up there for you guys to take a look at. The wage base, 2022 wage base is what we're looking at, $147,000. Additional Medicare tax, when that is, how that's calculated and when we apply that. That's the 0.9% that is only assessed on the employee for wages that exceed $200,000 during the year. FLSA, like I mentioned there, all those provisions, remember those are the four main provisions of the FLSA, have to deal with overtime provisions, minimum wage, child labor, and record-keeping requirements. Enterprise coverage versus individual coverage. Remember, there are two ways that employees can be covered by the FLSA. They may work for a covered enterprise if that enterprise in general overall meets the requirements. So be aware of what those requirements were. If the enterprise itself is not required to abide by the FLSA, it still could be that the individual employee is covered by the FLSA, right, based upon their duties. And remember, most people are in this country are covered by the protections of the FLSA. The payroll register versus the employee earnings record. And again, my tip to you is to use the words in there, use the titles to remember which is which. So the payroll register pertains to all of the information, all of the pay information for one particular payroll. So it would include every information on every employee that was paid during that pay period, right? Whereas the employee earnings record, we've got the word employee in it, so it just pertains to the employee. So it is a cumulative total for the year for each individual employee. Okay. 941. So we just finished going through that. Those payment requirements. Remember, we have certain. The more an enterprise owes in payroll taxes, the quicker they have to make those payments, make those deposits. We have the monthly schedule, we got quarterly. Well, first off, we've got annual, right? And that's that Form 944. If you owe less than $1,000 in payroll taxes for the entire year, that's what you can file, and you can pay it on an annual basis. But for our purposes, we're really concerned about these 941s. We have the monthly deposit schedule or the quarterly deposit schedule. Remember, if it's under $2,500 owed during the quarter, it would be the quarterly deposit schedule. We have the monthly deposit schedule as well. If it is over $2,500 up to $50,000 during that look back period, and remember the look back period runs from July 1st to June 30th. The IRS looks at the total payroll taxes that were paid during that time. If it exceeds $50,000, they're going to put the enterprise on a semi-weekly payroll schedule. If it's less than $50,000, then they will keep them on a monthly schedule. Remember, every business starts out on a monthly schedule. So, and then we've got that semi-weekly schedule. So let me go back a minute here though. Quarterly schedule, then the deposits are required to be paid with the 941 on the due date of the 941. Does anybody remember the due date of the 941? So it's a quarterly report. We're reporting for the quarter. Yeah, yeah. So the last day of the month following the quarter end. So remember, first quarter, then it would be due April 30th because that first quarter ends March 31st. So the last day of the month following the end of the quarter is April 30th, and that goes on for each of those quarters. So if you're on a quarterly deposit schedule, you follow that same schedule as the reporting schedule. So you don't have to pay it until then. If you're on a monthly schedule, anybody remember when those monthly payments are due?
The next day.
So not the next day. So you're on a monthly schedule. Those are due by, what's that? Not the end of the month. That's the quarterly. The monthly schedule, they're due by the 15th of the following month. That deposit is due by the 15th of the following month. Okay? Unless it falls on a weekend or holiday, and then it's the next business day. And that pertains to every deadline that the IRS has, right? So if you're on a monthly deposit schedule, you have to make that deposit by the 15th of the following month. So a business who's on a monthly deposit schedule, the month of September, today is October 5th, they don't have to make that deposit yet. They'll have to make it by the 15th. Well, I think the 15th is a Sunday, so they'll make it by the 16th. All right? We've got Friday the 13th, by the way, this month. And then the semi-weekly, and I will tell you honestly, I always have to stop and think about this. If the payday is on, what's it again? Saturday, Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday, then the payment has to be made by the following Friday. If it's Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, then it has to be paid by the following Wednesday. Do I have that right?
Yeah.
I have to think about that one myself because it's confusing. And remember, semi-weekly does not mean that the employer pays twice a week. It means that there are 2 days on which the IRS receives payments from employers. Okay, either Wednesday or Friday is when they receive those payments. And then we've got finally, on any particular payday where the liability, the payroll tax liability exceeds $100,000, there is a next day deposit requirement, right? Even if you're on a monthly or quarterly, usually a quarterly deposit schedule, if you have a single pay period where it's $100,000 or more, you got to pay it by the end of the next business day. All right. Filing requirements for those 941s. Remember that we file those on a quarterly basis. Those again are due at the last day of the month following the quarter. Okay. SECA tax, self-employed tax. So be familiar with those tax rates for SECA. Remember, they're just double what they are for FICA. Right? We still have the Social Security wage base that applies to SECA tax. We still have the additional Medicare tax that applies to SECA tax. But those other, so the Social Security and Medicare tax, both halves of those are paid by the self-employed individual. Independent contractors versus employees. We went over that quite a bit. Defining, we've got those economic factors, those 6 economic factors, and those are listed again in our agendas. So you can go back and look at those as reminders for your study. Keeping straight the difference between the independent contractors and employees. We need to make that distinction because a lot of these laws, the withholding laws for Social Security and Medicare tax, the FLSA laws, a lot of employee protection laws only apply to employees. They do not apply to independent contractors, right? And as a payroll professional, we may be involved in making payments to contractors, but our main function is to take care of employees and get them paid. Minimum wage, so we all know that's $7.25 an hour, but being able to calculate that minimum wage, and if we happen to be in a state or a locality that has a minimum wage that's higher than the federal minimum wage, then whatever the higher amount is, that's what would be controlling, that's what we would have to pay. If it's an amount lower, as we mentioned, there are some states that have on their books minimum wage rates that are lower. Some don't have any minimum wage, but they still have to enforce the federal minimum wage. Okay. Tip income reporting. Remember, we've got that the minimum wage for tipped employees and the tip credit. Those two amounts combined equals $7.25 an hour. The tips have to amount to enough so that the employee has made at least $7.25 an hour for the hours that they have worked. If they're over 40 hours during the week, then those tips have to be substantial enough to cover that overtime rate as well. Anything I left out? That's pretty much the whole three chapters there. Let me see, I'm gonna turn this off real quick. I wanna see if there's anything else on here that I didn't mention that I wanna mention. Canvas refers to these as quizzes. I don't know why. It's a test. Okay. I'm just looking to see if I missed anything. be very careful when you're reading the questions. Slow down and read every word, okay? Because it, there are a lot of, and I mean, you've all experienced it where you're like, oh my gosh, that was such a stupid mistake on my part. It's all because I didn't read carefully enough, and I misunderstood the meaning of the question. You should have plenty of time to take the exam, okay? So don't worry about that. There are, how many questions do we have? They said there are true, false, and multiple choice. The extra credit ones do involve some calculations though, and you do have to show your work, and there's a space on here to show your work. I know that's a pain typing it out. If you're in here and you're like, I can't do this, if you want to write it down and hand it in to me, that's fine as well. Okay, so I don't have a problem with that. There are 33 questions and then 2 extra credit questions on top of that. Let's see. Like I said, conceptually, they're not conceptually, but they're much more similar to the assessment questions than they are to the homework questions, except for those extra credit questions. Those are more similar to homework questions because they do involve calculations. Now, not to say that there are others that involve calculations too, but not quite as intricate. And you've got like multiple choice or true, false. Let's see. Know the difference between unemployment insurance and workers' compensation insurance. Remember, workers' compensation is when a worker is injured. Unemployment insurance is for unemployed workers. We talk about what happens when an employee overpays. I did talk a little bit about the fact that, but I may have glossed over it. So, when we've got somebody who is, either they had 2 jobs during the year and combined those 2 jobs exceeded the wage base, right, that 147, but individually they didn't exceed the wage base. Or if you've got somebody who is an employee and then they're self-employed, you may exceed that wage base as well. If an employee or an individual, a taxpayer, exceeds the wage base but has had Social Security taxes withheld, they are over withheld, that is reconciled on the individual tax return. Okay, so when they file their taxes, there is a place to account for that amount. I don't know if so when you're filling out your tax forms, or when a preparer is filling out your tax forms, they always enter in the amount of Social Security tax that you paid and Medicare tax, because it will calculate if it was the correct amount. Sometimes mistakes are made, but sometimes as well, the employee has been over withheld because they had multiple jobs. And altogether they exceeded that 147, but they didn't exceed the 147 on an individual job. So that reconciliation happens on the individual tax return, and they get a refund of that money at that time. The employer doesn't get a refund. So remember, they've withheld that too, but they don't get a refund on that. Let's see. We talked about the fact that the wage base changes every year. I gave you that example, that it's different this year and next year than it was in 2022. Overtime. Did I mention overtime on there? We spent a lot of time on overtime, so we should be good with that. Yeah, that's about it. Any questions? No? Okay. Well, you guys are, I'll give you 5 bonus minutes here. So if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email, message me. Okay? Have a great day.